SCP-8605, The Steel Soul, Part 1. Existence is transient, and nothing lasts forever. This is certainly not a lesson that anyone really needs to be taught by an SCP video, but while we might be perpetually aware of this fact, humans have developed countless distractions to divert our attentions away from the impermanence of our station. Every so often, of course, we're hit with the sudden remembrance of this fact, until some other distraction can perhaps pull us once again from pondering it. If this all seems barely philosophical, then it's a good lead-in to SCP-8605, an article connected to SCP-7005 and the Lampeter network, focusing on the people still working for the failing network in its dying days. As a reminder, Lampeter is a multi-dimensional network of trains and other conveyances designed to move through different timelines, universes, and realities, which has slowly been dying off due to the presence of the Neon God, a deific force spreading endless cities to everything it touches. I'll just note here that this is very much an article that's more akin to a tale, much like SCP-7005 itself. With that, let's take a look. We start with some text from Dr. Simon Kells, one of the primary characters from SCP-7005, and a project lead on studying Lampeter. Can a thing die which has never lived? When I was very young, my parents built a metal jungle gym for me in our backyard. 2 swings, a teeter-totter, and a slide, all shiny and new. Painted steel tubes slotted together, blue and white. Seats of white plastic and chains gleaming silver. There was a pattern on the tubes, but I don't remember what it was. I do remember what a vast, solid thing my swing set seemed to be. A pocket world with logic and motion and life all in itself. A discrete but open system of which I could be one part. Years later, when rust had set in and the pattern was irrecoverable, both in fact and in my memory, and the sun had baked the seats until they had cracked, and the chains would never again support a child's weight, and anyway, I had grown so ponderous and inflexible that it had become, by contrast, something fragile out of scale, and our stock of sunny afternoons together had been spent, and my chest grew tight as I saw that once beloved, lifeless thing reduced to so much scrap by age and inattention, and I looked on its remains with a guilt more appropriate to the shell of a dying friend. I realized for the first time just how much this piece of artifice had mattered to me. With what energy those slips from earthly bondage had imbued it. How much of my essence, and that of those I loved, I had invested there. I placed my hand on every fragment, rubbing grit and grime into the ridges of my fingerprints, and I closed my eyes, though the light was too bright, and an orange glow crept through the skin of my lids, and I imagined something entered into me from the depths of every hollow metal heart. I imagined that this aggregate, unmade thing which could not die would yet live on in me, that I was reclaiming what I had unknowingly but willingly given, that when both of us left this patch of yellowing grass which shortly would become a nowhere as a consequence of our parting and departing, something of what we had meant to each other, ride and rider, would be carried on in my breast. I stood in my backyard, a grown adult, and felt a remorse I could never justify to anyone but myself, and even then only in true darkness, where judgment's eyes are blind, and I silently apologized to an unfeeling oxide wreck. I had never felt so ridiculous in all my life. But I woke this afternoon in a puddle of my own sick, sheltered by blinds drawn against a world resting in the hands of men with hollow breasts, to whom there is no spark in any living thing worth speaking of, worth speaking to, worth saving, and I wondered if it matters where you glimpse the imprimatur of being. Whether you see it in the mirror as the overseers do, or in others, as Rosie must. If it's really her updating the files, and not just another cruel joke of the Council. Or whether, like me, you see it in the places and things which have witnessed us at our happiest, our best, in our most bold and perfect moments. Because isn't simply seeing it enough? I find that I want to see it again, if only once. So I wash away the residue of failure and disgust, the poison that boiled up inside me, boiled over and burned on its way out. I am raw and empty yearning. I will go to where the sun is shining on the glass and steel, and dare it to break my heart again. Because if it still can be broken, then the rust can't have set in too deep. Dr. Simon Kells. We're then given the file for SCP-8605, which has the Archon object class, meaning that the Foundation could theoretically choose to contain it, but they're choosing not to for some reason. 8605 is a set of documents, each identifying themselves as the LNESC Operator's Manual. Each instance pertains to one known component of or system relating to SCP-7005, the interdimensional transportation network known as Lampeter. Instances periodically appear at the workspaces of Lampeter personnel, updated in new editions with additional and/or altered content. The bulk of this content pertains to the care and maintenance of Lampeter apparatus, the network of which comprises a wide variety of transit technology across thousands of continuous and detached universes. Despite multiple attempts at enhanced surveillance, no instance's arrival at its respective station has ever been witnessed. The instances invariably provide valuable and accurate instruction for Lampeter operators, though their content is by no means restricted to this. Several peculiarities have included references to the Lampeter Non-Euclidean Shipping Company, or LNESC, despite the organization becoming insolvent in 2021. Higher edition numbers, most often associated with older branches of the network, contain increasingly eccentric and frequently irrelevant information presented with the same levels of specificity and gravity elsewhere employed for technical specifications, upkeep, and repair procedures. No author has ever been indicated, and it's infeasible for a single individual to have authored the over 4,000 instances presently known to the Foundation, plus the innumerable other copies that are likely out there. Textual analysis indicates, however, that a single authorial voice pervades throughout. There is also a definite correlation between higher edition numbers and a more erratic, conversational tone, though textual analysis does not suggest any change in the identity of the unknown author. We're provided a comparison between two different editions featuring the same system, the T-Bar surface lift in Universe H576, Carcorum Unbroken, providing access for the Lampeter connection to Universe H235, Mercury Shores. The section in the 45th edition reads, Upgrade and Replacement. Improvements in material science may eventually obsolesce wooden T-bars, which degrade in natural environments and develop stress fractures from impacting the rears of their passengers and moving them uphill. Increasing obesity rates will also be a factor in wear and tear. While steel is impractical as a replacement material due to its weight, redirecting excess load to the cables, which are much more difficult and costly to replace, and which fail only catastrophically, polymers and plastics presently in development are expected to obsolesce organic construction materials in the long term. Every effort should be taken to keep devices servicing a Lampeter connection in tip-top modern condition. Pretty standard stuff, I suppose, whereas the section from the 272nd edition reads, Transcendent Obsolescence. The wooden T-bar is a relic, and relics catalyze awe. Steel chairs soar effortlessly overhead, the literal heights of modernity, and the grounded would-be ascendant awaits instead a rough collision with the past, in a state of near religious trepidation. It touches a nerve which evolved to anticipate the blow of a master's cudgel or the impact of falling rock. In this instant, we are slaves to a crude device, wholly at its mercy. The seats swing free on the approach, unencumbered, and we wonder if once our turn comes round, they might not swing past entirely, leave us quivering but otherwise motionless upon the platform, a figure of both fun and irritation for our peers as we become an obstruction to their own ascents. When the blow finally arrives, it is always vulgar and ill-timed. This is key. We feel badly used, an afterthought, the only piece of this machinery whose presence is not necessary. We feel so superfluous that surely we are bound to slip off and fall, or else we wonder whether it will be possible to shed our companion at the apex of the climb. Has provision been made for our escape? Might we not be shoved back down again? One does not entertain such thoughts about plastic and metal. Polymers are rational, but wood is older than courtesy. Yet though it is often callous, and we will receive our knocks, it is rarely outright cruel. This seat of unreason was once a living thing. It can be negotiated. Though irrational, wood also mediates the modern with the ancient. The forest is forever, and even in rough opposition, life recognizes life. This kinship forestalls a greater terror by far, that of the new and impartial, the detached austerity of perfect artifice. Nothing so old that it was hewn from a tree can hold us in permanent thrall. This fear, though profound, is only a fleeting thing. As the bar raises us without incident, we leave our trepidation far behind and below. We have lost the persistent primal dread of a sharpened stick, which once made the difference between life and death to our forebears. The moment of doubt, the sharp-drawn breath, and the burn of cold in our lungs is an energizing sequence which cannot be replaced. But when it passes, we see the truth in this landscape of cultivated lies. Each blunted pole is an anachronism on the slopes, an oasis of atavism in that most contrived of outdoor spaces. This is the closest that an organized mind can come to the rapture of facing down a slavering beast, and the illusion is only sustained for an instant. But oh, that instant! It will compensate for the stymied catharsis a Lampeter passenger experiences when they mount at last the summit and are robbed of the chance to descend again at speed. The past has passed. The multiverse awaits. Upgrade at your peril. A voyage which sparks no wonder, trading a single sharp shock for the pervasive unease of streamlined steel, is little more than an odd commute. Although the Foundation can't figure out where these manuals are coming from, they do contain knowledge otherwise unavailable due to the destruction of the Elnesk's records in the waning days of its final administration. They have therefore been widely adopted for instructional purposes by both new and established personnel, within and without the Foundation. Discretion is nevertheless advised where content deviates from logical, pertinent guidance, though personnel having long-term association with the Lampeter network frequently disregard this admonishment. As the Department of Interdimensional Logistics lacks the resources for a comprehensive investigation, no effort has been made to determine the true origins of 8605. We're given another message from Dr. Kells, which reads, "Until today. Because what else am I even here for? They set us up to fail. No, worse, they set us up and forgot. They're indifferent to our success or failure. The Council simply doesn't care. Infinite possibilities in every direction, and they couldn't care less. Something crawls up the tracks, gobbling down the breathing cosmos and spitting out empty Levitt towns and plan voisins, and everything that matters is quite literally on the line, and I've been generously granted the operating budget to do nothing about it but watch. At least I'm doing that much. These files probably haven't graced an overseer's eyes in months. Rosie is gone, lost to the heart of the most dangerous mystery we've ever faced. We still don't know how to stop it. We probably never will. I could wait out that entropy in sterile safety. I could shut myself in my office, shuffle the paperwork, keep telling everyone who's left to rotate the tires and patch up the punctures. That's what the council expects of me. Probably Rosie would expect no better. But there's one last mystery left to solve, and if this entire enterprise is doomed to decay and ruin, I at least want to know exactly what it is we're losing. I don't know who will be left to say it, but I want them to be able to say that I tried, that at least one person did care, one version of one person wanted to do something, be something better. So if you're reading this, you empty bastards, I'll be back when the circuit loops round, and not a moment sooner. Don't like it? Come and get me. We're provided an interview between Dr. Kells and Anna Vardanyan, station master in Universe B-247, Red Gardens. Kells stands on a high wooden platform overlooking a broad green swath as a herd of antelope graze by a pool of blue water far below. A gale is blowing, and there is a steady roar in the air with an electric hum audible beneath it. Kells looks up to see a suspended monorail in international modern style pulling into the station. The lead carriage stops in front of him, and he climbs aboard, finding the interior to be faded but well kept. A woman stands at the window opposite the door, looking down at the antelope, and she smiles as Kells approaches. The two greet one another as the monorail begins to move at a slow pace. Kells remarks that he's surprised she wanted to meet up here instead of an office, but she replies that she could simply die if moving from one vantage point is so much trouble. Kells laughs, and Vardanyan says that there's a romance to this thing, and she gets carried along with it, figuratively and literally. The monorail rounds a sharp bend, and Kells swallows heavily, causing her to ask him if he's feeling alright. Kells raises a hand and places the other on a stanchion for support, saying that he'll be fine. She suggests that they could stop the train, as there's probably nobody else riding anyway. Kells replies that that wouldn't be very good business, to slip the schedule just because nobody cares. But she argues that just because they aren't here doesn't mean they don't care. If you love something well enough, you can keep away from it indefinitely. She thinks that must be what perfect love is like, and she hopes she never loves anything that well. The two watch as the field gives way to rolling hills, peppered with white flowers. A shaggy predator pursues a pair of antelope, its form too motion-blurred to be properly discerned. Kells asks her what she knows about the operator's manual, and she says only that it doesn't say anything she doesn't already know. Kells replies that surely the technical details are useful at least, but she says that she doesn't count numbers as knowledge. That's just rules, and rules fill the space meant for understanding. You never need both. Kells imagines that she understands this train pretty well, but she says that she understands it less and less every day, comparing it to falling asleep. She reaches out and touches the window, tracing the path of the predator as it downs the first antelope, and a turn in the track removes the scene from view. She then touches her own cheek, leaving a faint imprint of rust on her skin. Kells asks if she's ever seen anything in the manual that struck her as strange, or whimsical, or even inappropriate. A look of guilty pleasure flashes across her face, and she says that she hasn't seen nearly enough, but maybe she's too far gone and it's just regurgitating her faded impressions back to her. She then says that they fail her so much, it's only natural that she fail them right back. Kells asks if she's referring to the train or Lampeter, but she says that it's all the same, and touches the window again. He asks her why she's doing that, caressing the glass and steel, and she looks down at her hand in surprise. She says that that's interesting, and maybe she's trying to remind herself that it's still here, or that she is. These things aren't as permanent as they feel. Kells states that this is one of the newer legs of Lampeter, so it's going to outlast either of them, but Vardanyan replies that it's already half gone. She walks to the opposite side of the carriage and asks if he has seen the rail, which he hasn't, as it didn't seem important without the train. She asks him if he knows what monorail means, which he does, and then she asks him why that's worthy of note. She explains that loneliness is a human kind of math, the result of subtraction, which he corrects her to mean difference. She says that this train is different now and forever. There used to be 2 lines here, running parallel for a good long stretch, and if you look you can see the difference down there. Kells looks out the window and down, seeing a few broken pylons and the remains of a track still visible, though overgrown with neon green grass. Kells asks what happened to it, and she says that it's the same thing that's happening to the rest of the system. Kells didn't think it was this bad, so close to home, but she replies that that's just his perspective. In another sense, they're far-flung, and the momentum is still in here, still resonating, flying them apart. The wind outside the monorail increases in intensity, whistling in the space between the carriage and the track. Kells attempts to match the pitch with a whistle of his own, then stops, asking her if they can focus on the manual. Vardanyan replies that the only parts worth focusing on will come up organically as they talk, little snapshots of the things that matter. She then blinks and repeats the word snapshots, exclaiming that the manual says they should take photographs of everything, outside and inside. Kells asks why, as that seems like something more appropriate for a tourist handbook, wondering what photographs have to do with keeping the line going. She replies that nothing could be more important, and she reaches into her pocket to pull out a creased, faded photograph. It shows a high-windowed perspective on a gully filled with crystalline spires in a variety of hues, with the apparent size and function of city skyscrapers. Fine detail is difficult to discern, but it is possible that humanoid figures cluster at the apex of each spiral, arms extended in greeting. A hand, presumably belonging to the photographer, is pressed to the glass in response. It's a view from the other monorail, and Vardanyan says that it keeps her awake at night, because you couldn't take that photograph now, or ever again. Someone was holding a camera and pointing it out the window, one specific window beside a specific seat, and in one specific instant they pulled the trigger and committed that view to posterity. It was an event. They saw something they wanted to remember, experienced interest, curiosity, confusion, or surprise. Maybe just the impulse to make a record because the view was there and they were there. A sense of duty, or the moment, but it was a moment. In some sense, it mattered. They turned off the flash so the glass wouldn't catch it. They framed their subject. There was intentionality. And all of that happened in a point of space which doesn't even culturally exist anymore. You can't go to where that picture was taken and take it again, as it's all gone. They've taken the sky without thinking, without even a whisper of intent. One insufficient digit in a ledger somewhere worlds away, and the heavens fell. That shutterbug had a god's eye view, and we let Olympus crumble. Kells remarks that it's a bit dramatic, but she disagrees. She can't express the drama in a way that does justice. When the other line came down, it took an infinity of vantage points with it. She just showed him the only record of an angle on the universe that she and him can never, ever access in the real world. That was a scene from a time-locked vault. If the people waving back were here today, they'd be staring into space, the gap between what was and is. Kells counters that this line isn't the same as it was before either. The land settles, the rails shift subtly, gravity even pulls our eyes down lower. Vardanyan agrees that that's also a nightmare, but it's just easier to ignore. They're not following in anyone's footsteps here, and that's not even starting on the passage of heavenly bodies through the black. Really, we're always treading new ground, second by second, the footprints behind us enshrouded in firmament. Kells says that scientifically maybe, but culturally it's the same track. Vardanyan turns and smiles, telling him that there's hope for him yet. She then asks what if she were to kiss him right here and now? Would he still feel the thrill when it crosses this stretch again, or would he understand that he can never go back? What if they had kissed for the very first time on that other track, with the spires below as witnesses? Would they ever be able to look each other in the eyes again, knowing that their old selves were haunting an abstracted stretch of air, hanging, suspended over nothing where a something used to be? If they met that distant audience, how could they tell them, honestly, that they were truly in love, when they saw it consummated in a future oblivion now past? Vardanyan then stops, and apologizes for making Kells uncomfortable, but he just says that it was unexpected. He doesn't really have an answer for anything. Vardanyan replies that she's thought it through 1,000 times, and doesn't have one either. She then quotes the manual, stating that the landscape should only change to introduce new points of interest, incorporate new sight lines, strengthen the ambience of the site. Human beings orient themselves by landmarks. They pace out their lives from backstage to center and back, counting steps, and their legs remember. When the context is lost, so too is the sense of place. And it's impossible to go anywhere if you don't know where you are. Impossible for anything to be new if what was old has already gone. Kells says that a whole universe is probably cut off from Lampeter, or at least harder to reach now, and here they are talking about old photographs and landmarks. Vardanyan says that it's not the same kind of problem, and Kells agrees, stating that it's much worse. Vardanyan argues that it's not worse, just different. That universe is still there, while her points in the sky are gone, blown away on the gale. Both inaccessible, but not both extant. Kells supposes that it's a question of priorities, but she doesn't like to have priorities, as moods are more natural. She then runs her hands along her jeans, reaching back as though to remove the photograph, before stopping herself and forcing her hand into a side pocket. Kells says that nothing about Lampeter is natural, but she says that some things are, like decay. It all rots down to its most essential state eventually. Kells asks what she meant a few minutes ago when she said that the ghosts were suspended over nothing. Vardanyan explains that the spires went the way of the line that crossed them, and they don't exist anymore. Maybe there was no point in having any of it if nobody could take photographs. She points out the window and says that they're passing what's left of them now. Kells looks out and sees shattered stumps of crystalline spires littering the gully below. The vegetation doesn't grow over them, though the surrounding earth is entirely subsumed in green. It vibrates in the intense breeze from above. The remains of the other monorail can barely be discerned where the land begins to drop. Kells says that he thought the spires were some far-flung thing, but they were here, where the two lines ran parallel. So if they were still here, you could still see them. Vardanian says that you could, but not in the same way. Kells argues that nothing was really lost before the landscape changed, but she says that nothing but context, so everything. Kells says that it's just a slight change in angle, a trick of perspective, but she counters that he's describing reality. She supposes that's what he does, though, and Kells says that the manual does as well, but she thinks that he'll find that what the manual does is altogether different. She thinks that it's better if he finds that angle himself, and maybe he can bring her back a picture when he finds it, assuming it's still out there. Kells says that that's also assuming she's still here, and she touches the window again, saying that she won't be, even if she is. We're then given another excerpt from the 29th edition of the manual, pertaining to an orbital lift in Universe E197, Transhumanist Singularity, which reads, "On aesthetics. The new aches to be clean. It should be scrubbed until raw, scrubbed until flesh would blister, so it gleams in the presence of the sun, the first and truest light. We go naked into the abyss, where the light is naked too. The atmosphere does not bend it, as it no longer bends us, extended from our bourne by this stark and startling bow. Every accretion is weight, and the goal is perfect weightlessness. The past is filth, and the future is bright. A stark contrast should be maintained between. There is another time, another place for the corruption of sentiment. If we go to the stars, we must not go venal. There is nothing evil there which we do not bring with us." We're then provided another interview, this time between Kells and the station master of that universe, Farax Nur. Kells is standing at the base of a colossal tower which stretches to the clouds and beyond, with no end in sight. A vast structure stands at the bottom, encircling the steel, and a dozen loading docks are thronged with workers, trucks, and trains unloading cargo. There is a sense of impending completion in the frenzy of their motions. In the far distance, a line of passengers prepare to embark. A man bounds towards Kells from a secondary entrance, waving his hands and smiling widely, calling out to him. The two greet one another, and Nur asks if he's going up the well today, gesturing up at the tower with a flourish. Kells isn't sure what he means, and he says that it's the gravity well, Earth's gravity. This thing goes from 1G to 0 in the blink of an eye, assuming it takes you most of a week to blink. Kells replies that that has to be the least efficient ride in all of Lampeter, but Nur says that the Lampeter bit is just an hour on, unless you're going to D473, which is 5 days up. It's faster to take the coaster to C926, then the Marine Railway to C847, then the tram to D192, then the closet in the junked space station in Duluth that opens up on the top of the elevator here. A lot of interchanges, but it still shaves off 3 days. Kells supposes that the elevator is more scenic, though, but Nur isn't so sure, asking him if he's ever seen Duluth. Kells replies that he's seen a Duluth, and Nur leads him to the entrance, where the walls are paneled in a foreign material, like steel but with a web-like structure. He asks to what this humble lamp man owes this visit, and Kells asks if they call him Lamp Man around here. Nur admits that mostly he calls himself that, but he's working on the others. Kells notes that he seems pretty happy with his job as they walk through the cargo offices, where workers on telephones are holding data pads put finishing touches on the manifest for the next trip. Nur says that most people around here only get to take folks into space, so they're all jealous of him. Kells says that the purpose of his visit is the operations manual, leading Nur to pull out a small, rolled-up booklet out of his jacket pocket. Kells remarks that it's just a pamphlet, and Nur explains that they don't maintain the elevator. It's not theirs. They just have a unisex bathroom in the cargo section, a very nice one, and he and Beatrice from the Manifest office take turns tidying it. Beatrice is very nice also, but he thinks that she takes smoke breaks in there, so it's probably best not to breathe while in there to avoid cancer. He asks if Kells thought that Lampeter owned a space elevator, and Kells says that no, of course not. Nur muses that it must have given them a real shock when they finished chiseling out that hole in space and found that it opened on space. He shudders to think how many palms the Lampeters had to grease to get that lift built in Ecuador, just so they wouldn't be stuck in empty air, minus the actual air. It makes him smile, though, to think of them reaching down, the ones here reaching up, meeting in the middle, like Adam touching Adam. He thinks that it was Adam Lampeter, and thinks there was an Adam, but Kells interrupts him by slapping his own hand with the pamphlet. Nur blinks, and his mouth hangs open as though he has forgotten what he was talking about. Kells asks what's in the pamphlet, and Nur says that for one, it says that it's fine to smoke in the washroom from time to time, as apparently industrial bathrooms that don't smell like smoke smell wrong. Something about how travel needs contrast, but you don't get that naturally by going straight up, so you need to work some in artificially. Smoke on the inside, pristine on the outside. There's a lot in there about keeping the elevator facade scrubbed, and the company indulges them. He thinks that they're afraid of the Foundation, though he doesn't see why. It's not like the Foundation has a space elevator. And he briefly forgets that he also works for the Foundation now, since they took over the Elnesk company. Kells says that maybe the elevator owners don't mind him scrubbing their elevator for free, and Nur had never thought of that. The pamphlet also says that passengers aren't to queue in the loo, and are encouraged to circulate to keep the air moving. They also shouldn't make a fuss, or the regulars will remember them and start asking questions when they disappear. They don't want a repeat of that murder on the Lampeter Express. Kells exclaims, but Nur just moves on, saying that it says that you should be alone at a window when they cross into the stratosphere, to have a moment of reflection on the power of technology. You can't touch a god's face, but it's only polite to look him in the eye as you pass. Personally, all he ever sees is clouds. An alarm then blares out, 3 times, and Nur says that they should head to the observation deck. The observation deck is a wide arc of windows and a glass floor, through which bare soil can be seen. The room is full of passengers, and it's impossible to tell which might also be riding Lampeter. The elevator rises, and Kells watches the landscape of Ecuador fall slowly away, below and beyond. He bets that this thing blots out the sun on a bad day, and Nur says that the shadow stretches clean to the Galapagos. Kells asks if that's true, and Nur admits that he doesn't know, he's just talking. Kells wonders how much of downtown Quito they had to demolish to build this, and Nur says that it was a lot. He bets that that was probably in the manual, if they put out an early edition, to make sure they demolish something to build the tower. Space elevators are the tops in futurism. Futurism is the crazy wing of modernism, and modernism hates context. Kells remarks that that leads to people hating modernism, which also hates people. Nur comments that that's very funny, but Kells just says that that's why nobody cries when they knock down some old, brutalist building. Nur laughs, and Kells asks him if he thinks that they should, if people should lament environments that are indifferent to them, their wants and needs. Nur says that he thinks they do, and the idea that they don't is what tickled him. Somebody loves everything, and somebody grew up in every environment that's more than a few years old. If it isn't new to you, you don't see it the same. He also doesn't quite agree with Kel's premise either, and tells him to look around the next time he's walking the city, to see how much unmolested modernism he can find. He'll bet that there's not much, and a whole lot more of everything else. When its time was up, it got far worse than it ever gave. Kells says that it's violence paid unto violence, but Nur asks if that only applies to environments built for function rather than form, or does he apply the same criteria to cathedrals and palaces? Kells counters that it's a question of what you want the world to look like, saying that there's a lot more charm to Versailles than Cabrini Green, although he then admits that those are unfortunate examples. Nur says that a better example is that ugly tower they built for the World's Fair a few years back. A great big thing in the middle of a historic district, made of bare wrought iron and with its skeleton naked to the open air. It had everyone up in arms when they built it, and you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone saying anything nice about it at the time. Kells supposes that you can say the same about this elevator, and Nur certainly hopes so, as time heals all wounds, even wounds on the urban skin. Nur hears that that tower is a popular place for photos, though, with lovers kissing in the Champ de Mars, and Kells realizes that he was talking about the Eiffel Tower. Nur apologizes, saying that he knows it wasn't fair, but it was fun, and Kells just chuckles and shakes his head. He asks Nur if he figures that they're standing in the pristine cathedral of Lampeter, and Nur replies that it's something like that. There's a painting of this tower in the Tate, a shining silver beacon in the sky, and he likes to think that all that scrubbing helps. Kells can't imagine why anyone would want to adopt this thing as a symbol, as it's a commercial venture. The people who own it want to colonize outer space, to exploit resources, and get away from the little folks. Nur counters that they outnumber them, and eventually all the big folks die. Maybe all at once if we're very lucky. There's not enough air up there for people who don't contribute. Someday, as far as his grandchildren are concerned, this tower will always have been here, and it will mean something to them that has nothing to do with profit margins. People buy the myth, not the history. Kells says that that's good, as John Lampeter burned almost all of the Elnesk's history. Nur says that he just burned the parts his family owned, and couldn't touch what belonged to everyone else. Context is king, and the public imaginary is its first and grandest palace. Kells remarks that there's a philosopher hiding in every station master apparently, and Nur shrugs, saying that the mind broadens and it's an occupational hazard. The windows then suddenly dim, and Nur states that the company guidelines say to look away now. Kells asks what the manual says, as the orb of the sun comes into clear view. Both men wince as they look at it, and Nur remarks that he guessed right. We then get another note from Kells, which reads, "There's a photograph of me as a young child, sitting in a little wooden wagon with red rails, surrounded by all four of my grandparents. I think it's from my christening, which is fun, because that certainly didn't take. I am surrounded, and I am loved." Maybe 10 years later, and that wagon has been pulled around the backyard almost as much as the lawnmower has been pushed. I carry everything with it, even when the thing would be lighter on its own. But I don't go outside as much as I used to, at least not of my own volition. They have to kick me out, because I'd rather sit in front of the lights and make them dance. I think that makes me happier, although the bite marks on my controllers suggest otherwise. Conversely, I've never kicked the wagon in anger. But I'm kicking it today. The bottom has rotted out, because I never remember to put it in the shed when I'm done with it. The red sides are long since gone, so it's just the frame, the bottom, and the metal wheelbase and handle left. The wood in the middle has gone spongy, and I give it a kick, and there is give. My friend asks if he can kick it too. I let him. We kick the bottom out of it, wet splinters everywhere. And then my mother comes out of the house, aghast, and asks me what I'm doing. And I realize. My father makes up a new bottom and paints the whole thing white, like Gandalf after Moria. People have debated for a long time whether this makes it the same wagon or a new one, or something in between. It's an interesting discussion, but I think I know the answer. If it's not still the same wagon I killed, then why do I still remember the look on my mother's face whenever I see it in the shed? That clean white finish gathering dust and rat shit, and the metal no doubt rusting out below, where I can't see. Next, we move on to an excerpt from the 487th edition of the manual, from a section pertaining to a passenger locomotive in Universe K-086, Iron Marrow. Of honesty. A train does not pretend to be anything else. It is not a drawing room or hotel. It is not an intimate parlor. It is a mass of metal hurtling at inhuman velocity on a road custom tailored to admit no interruption. It is physical potential realized in full. It rumbles, it chatters, it thrums with power unbridled. It must be allowed to do these things. Its messages must be heard. It speaks of a hunger for fuel, of the brutality of speed, of the labors of its drivers and the legions of dead left in its wake. It boasts of mountains laid low and livelihoods made and lost. Not every message is intended for every rider. The unacquainted will absorb the terror, the thrill, and something of the romance. The enthusiast will appreciate the nuance, that which separates each train from its peers, justifying its name. Those whose forebears worked the rails will be attuned to the legacies of Watt, Brunel, and Fleming, and the coal-faced firemen and luggage handlers and conductors who lived what they dreamt and made it possible. If there is iron in your blood, it will sing when the whistle blows. A train's voice is a lullaby, half remembered in the species' substrate from the victorious trauma of civilization's cruelest chapters. Nothing can be done to quell this soothing savagery. Nothing should be attempted. As a follow-up, then, we have an interview between Kells and the station master of that universe, Stephen Goodman. Kells passes through a long carriage filled with mail sacks in neat rows, one of them marked with a stylized L. The door at the end opens on a narrow, exposed walkway with wind whipping past, and Kells has some difficulty opening the opposite door. The carriage beyond is empty except for a single man sitting by a window, looking out. Kells sits down across from him, and Goodman remarks that it's funny how it all looks bigger from in here, the landscape. You expect it to look like a kid's playset, but all that guff people talk on how rails shrank the world isn't true, far as he can see. Motion magnifies, gives perspective, and things just seem more important at speed. Kells asks if he's the station master, and he says that he's one of them, but he's riding home. Kells asks where he lives, and Goodman laughs, stating that he lives here, but he sleeps in Chicago. He muses that riding a train is not like sitting in your car. When you're stuck out on the freeway, all you can think of is the destination. When you're looking out these windows, though, it doesn't really matter where you're going anymore. Nowhere bound and bound to nowhere. The journey its own destination. You no more consider where the train is going than you consider the orbit of the Earth under your feet. Kells supposes that the manual has a lot to say about looking out the window, and Goodman states that there's a whole damn chapter last he looked. and might be more now. Kells asks him where he thinks it comes from, and Goodman says that he thinks it's where all this goes, tapping his head, and what's in here, thumping his chest. Nowhere else for it to go, except the ether, and he can't believe all that energy just evaporates into nothing. He then shivers, and Kells asks if he's alright. He says that it's just the chills, symptomatic, and it's not going to kill him yet. The iron bones make a powerful difference. Kells still offers condolences, but Goodman tells him not to be sorry, as they've all got their schedules to keep. He asks Kells if he's ever been alone on a train, and he says once or twice, maybe. Goodman says that the first time it happened to him, he was just a boy, right here on the Illinois Central. He can't say how, but he found himself as the sole occupant of a Pullman coach at the edge of dusk and dark. Maybe they were playing cards up front, or down back, and nobody thought to tell the skinny kid with the hungry look. Might be the gleam scared them off, as gamblers don't like risk so much as they claim. Kells asks him what it was like to have the train to himself, and Goodman says that it was like dying. It rolls on, the train, empty or full, and doesn't even notice the difference. A few hundred people barely register to 80 tons of freight. The rods churn and the wheels turn, and the black blur out the window keeps scrolling, and the whistle moans. The train doesn't care, but you do. He sighs and says that if that's how the end is, he won't be afraid. The two of them look out the window together for several minutes, before Goodman says they talk of travel between worlds, but an empty train is a traveling world. He then states that he always wanted to be in a crash, surprising Kells. He knows how it sounds, but can there ever be anything so apocalyptic? The first train he ever rode, he was still in short pants, and they were headed for a rail bridge. The other kids told him it was out, but the train kept moving, and he knew that they were going to take the plunge. Burn up or boil at the bottom, with no way to stop it. It's obvious now that they would have stopped the train, but not to a kid. You feel this thing moving beneath your feet, hell for leather. You hear her calling out to everything in her path, crying, keep away. You feel yourself a part of that engine of entropy. That vulnerable moment when everything is possible. You believe it when you hear this is the last ride, to that last, best terminal. In the moment, it was easier to believe that the world would end than that train ever slow down, all raw speed and danger. Nothing else to her, or to him. Kells asks if the bridge was out, but he says of course it wasn't. They shot over that span like a bat leaving hell, and he held his breath the whole way. Kells imagines that he was relieved, but he was disappointed. You don't come down from a thrill that easy. A train that never crashes is just a journey, but they could have been an event. Sometimes he thinks that's the only proper way to go out of service. He sighs again and says that they just fall apart now, each by each, calling it undignified. A body shouldn't only rot, where nobody knows your name or what you've done. It's like his nightmare's nightmare, this thing the Foundation let happen. The bridges are out, and they're plunging into depths more profound than he ever could have dreamed. He wonders where that goes, all that sorrow. Kells suggests that maybe it goes into the manual too, and Goodman agrees that it might, as it does moan so. As if in response, the train's whistle blows, and Kells remarks that despite the lack of passengers, the train keeps moving. Goodman says that they have to, as it's either burn up or rust out, and the machine doesn't know any other way, nor the railway men. Kells notes that he's seen dignity in rust, but Goodman would wager that he's never had rust in his bones or in his veins, as it agitates. The fact is that nobody sings about trains that live, and songs are what keep them alive. He supposes that's why he still rides, until one of them dies, or both. Either way, the last will be there for the other when it happens, and he says that maybe somebody will write a song about that. It's certainly clear that there's something off about each and every station master on the Lampeter network. Not in a morbid or horrific way necessarily, but more that they are all deeply connected to this dying network, outside of it just being a job. Kells so far hasn't really gained much information about where the manuals are coming from, but he's definitely gaining a lot of perspective about the train network and the people involved with it. We'll pick things up with part 2 to see where the journey takes him. SCP-8605 The Steel Soul Part 2. The multiversal Lampeter network is collapsing after the bankruptcy of its parent company, and the Foundation doesn't really care one way or the other if it goes. The Neon God is continuing to spread across the multiverse and transform everything into endless cities. Dr. Simon Kells decides that he doesn't have much else left, so he's going to try and figure out just one small aspect of the whole situation, where the operators' manuals are coming from. So far, he has bumped into a few eccentric station masters in different Lampeter stations, but still has no clear answers. It certainly seems like a journey where clear answers are going to be in short supply, but let's take a look. We pick things up where we left off with an excerpt from the 10th edition of the Lampeter Manual pertaining to a travelator in Universe M919, Smithian Hegemony. Mundane Carpet. The ideal form is as follows: clean, unobstructed, aesthetically functional, unpainted. Visual variety is unnecessary, and in fact, detrimental. The sole focus is continuous motion. No provision can be made for smooth transitions. The surface does not stop or even slow to admit or expel its passengers. Continuity unideal. We're then given an interview between Dr. Kells and Sandra Andronova, the owner and operator of the travelator. Kells stands on a moving carpet in a vast commercial complex, bustling with activity. There are 4 lanes to the travelator, and customers are placing tokens in turnstiles and stepping onto each conveyor at complex cloverleaf intersections, many of them carrying bags bulging with a variety of purchases. There is an additional turnstile up ahead, marked with a simple electric sign bearing the livery of Lampeter, though there is some barely legible text underneath it that reads, "Wholly owned and operated by Andronova Industries." Andronova herself is strolling leisurely on the other side of the rail, easily keeping pace with Kells, who remarks that he hates these things. She asks if he actually does, or if they just make him not feel anything, and he hates that, but he says that he definitely hates them. She suggests that maybe he hates the associations, as people don't like to be herded. They like to move at their own pace, but that's simply not always practical, and that's what these are for. Kells replies that it's not that his sense of individuality is wounded. It's that he doesn't like that the ground is moving under his feet, and there's something very primal about that. If the ground is moving, you should move your feet until the ground isn't moving anymore. She says that he's experiencing this as a sort of stabilized earthquake that he can't get away from, and exclaims that that would thrill her. Kells notes, however, that she's not along for the ride, causing her to pirouette and stretch without missing a step. The crowd outside the nearest shop murmurs, and one person takes a photo of her as she strikes a pose. She remarks that when everyone else is walking, riding is a luxury, but the inverse is also true. They're all just moving laterally, and that's what this is about, how society keeps rolling along. Kells states that she operates a synecdoche then, and she says that it's from New York to Beijing, and when you've got a part this big, imagine the size of the whole. Kells removes a token from his pocket as he reproaches the turnstiles for the Lampeter travelator. He leaves the crowd behind, as this line is apparently empty, though it passes through several declines and inclines composed of wide, featureless corridors. Kells says that he came here to talk about the manual, but she states that she hasn't read it. She has people for that, and she's heard their summaries, calling it pretty dull stuff. Kells remarks that maybe he should be talking to her people instead, but she replies that she doesn't pay them to talk. She pays them to fix the moving carpet. Talk is cheap, so it's only a service if you're getting it from someone whose time is priceless. She then says that he's welcome, by the way. Kells says that he was hoping to figure out where the manual even comes from and discern its nature, because it's an anomaly. Unlike Lampeter itself, they don't even have a working theory to explain it. Things that have been around so long, nobody knows who first put them there. Things that work, but nobody knows why. That sort of stuff just kind of builds up, like the neon god. She guesses that your random day-to-day accretion doesn't involve regular updates on fresh printed paper, but then maybe the network just has people for that. Kells questions that these would be people they don't know about, and that nobody ever sees, but she says that she couldn't pick one of her people out from a crowd. She'll never be on the same continent as some of the people who work for her. Lampeter is a money pit surrounded by a red tape cordon, but that doesn't mean you can see the whole thing by standing at the edge and looking down. Kells quips that he'll add a little army of invisible typists to the list of working theories then, but she just shrugs and says that it doesn't really matter. Kells says that her people use the manual to guide their daily tasks, and there's stuff in there about operations, refits, renovations, repairs. He asks if she's not bothered that they don't know who's setting the agenda she works to, but she says that she isn't, not as long as it works. She doesn't need to see the hand if it's pushing her in the right direction. Kells counters that her fortune rests on the whims of whoever is authoring that document, but she dismisses it. If it starts giving people bad advice, they'll just ignore it. They're not drones who do everything she tells them, but she always gets something roughly shaped like her way, and they feel like they've got a bit of wiggle room in their grind, and everybody's happy. Forward momentum, indistinguishable from futility. Andronova skips into a turn and begins walking backwards, suggesting he do the same, but he declines. She says that it feels good though, as they're carrying him. He'll get where he's going, on time, along with the rest of the linear people. This line goes horizontal, her lines go diagonal, and society goes vertical, with no upper bound. Kells questions why she even operates a Lampeter line with that attitude, to which she says that foreign money spends just as well, especially when you're the one who owns the multiversal currency exchange. Kells sighs and asks where she thinks the manual comes from, really. She asks if she didn't already answer that, but he says that she responded, but there's a difference, causing her to laugh. He repeats the question, and she asks if they're pretending that he doesn't know. She's all for diplomatic fiction, but she does need him to spell out how blind he wants her eye. Kells asks if she's suggesting that the Foundation created the operations manual, and just not telling anyone. She replies that she didn't mean for it to come across as a suggestion, to avoid liability, more of just a gentle hint. Kells counters that the manual has been appearing at Lampeter sites for over a century, and Andronova says that the Foundation has been around longer than that. Kells then says that Elnesk only went bankrupt a few years back, so she thinks that they were seeding instructions for other people's employees to follow. She thinks that that sounds like exactly the kind of thing his people do, but more likely, the Lampeters themselves started it, and the Foundation has just followed suit. Kells asks why they would do that, to which she simply says, control. Kells argues that the manual isn't about control, and is becoming less and less so every year, being filled with bizarre cultural nuance. She says that that is exactly her point. She knows from experience that wages buy people's hands, but their hearts take a different kind of compensation. Kells asks if she thinks it's their way of brainwashing her employees, but she says they're definitely not doing that to hers. There's hardly anything frou-frou in her manual as far as she knows, but they were one of the last acquisitions, so that's probably why they've been spared. Kells counters that it might actually be because there's nothing nostalgic or romantic about a travelator, and she pouts. She says that they made a coffee table book full of photos a few years back, and it still sells like hotcakes. The two are approaching the end of the travelator, and she says that she doesn't have time to walk and talk out of time and space with him, so she'll level with him. She thinks that the Lampeters made the manual because they were businessmen, and she thinks that the Foundation makes it because they're a government. They can't leave well enough alone. They want to be a soft glove on the invisible, and they've never seen a successful business they didn't itch to meddle with. They want a kinder, gentler world because they don't understand the first thing about survival. They don't have to provide for themselves, and they hardly have to provide for others. They have no achievements that belong to them in particular, and all they can do is take things that other people built and compromise them. That's what they use the manual for. Kells asks why it's also filled with technical specifications, but she says that that's the lure. That's how they get in. They make sure it gets used, and that's when the insidious stuff starts taking hold. Maybe he's right, elsewhere, but people around here know bullshit when they smell it. That's why she keeps the streets clean. Kells asks if the Lampeters were also trying to achieve a cultural shift, but she just thinks that they were crazies with a lousy business sense. The Foundation capitalized on the crazy that was already there, finding a purpose for it and redirecting it. It might be the only thing about them that she's respected, so it might not pay to disenchant her. Kells says that it's certainly a theory, and she says that she'll agree to call it that for as long as they have a working relationship. Andronova Industries is proud to be a part of the Lampeter family, and she gives a quick thumbs up. Kells, however, states that this isn't Lampeter. This place is nothing like Lampeter, as Lampeter is more. Andronova asks if he draws that distinction with the forms he does like, or just the ones that don't make him misty. Kells remarks that she could at least paint some murals on the ceiling, as the Lampeters used to do that with their trains. She says that that much is in the manual, something about how pretty pictures on the ceiling will just make people fall over backward trying to look at them. People are very, very stupid when you start giving them choices. They're at their cleverest when there's no agency. Kells replies that that doesn't make any sense, but she says that all she knows is that everyone on these carpets is bored out of their gourd, and when they step back onto unmoving ground, they're not going to miss a beat. They keep the spring she puts in them, and get to keep the momentum they paid her for. When there's no more pep in their step, they can pick it back up on the return. But if they hated the whole experience, then it's all the more reason to put it behind them, at speed. Kells asks if that was also in the manual, and she says that it probably is. She thinks that he's got trains on the brain, but transportation isn't always about the journey it takes you on. Sometimes it's about the journey away from the journey. Hindsight is only comforting when the present is better than the past. She thinks that Lampeter needs more airports, as that would sort out the romantic types fast. She asks if it won't feel wonderful to be master of his fate and feet again, as that's her gift to him. Kells replies that there's only one way forward, and it's the same on all her carpets. Andronova agrees, but says that he gets to decide whether he's going to attack the road with gusto or be a speed bump for everyone else. She asks if that isn't exciting, but Kells doesn't respond as he steps into the wall and disappears. Next, we have an excerpt from the 707th edition of the manual pertaining to a gondola lift network in Universe Q417, Fume Void. On halation. Fog lights should be halogen and kept bright. No LEDs. The aim is not to pierce the smog, but flood it. Flare out in it. Do not curtain the windows, or else curtain them identically. Blinds, never drapes. The eyes should burn, or smolder half-lidded, but they must always be perceptible as eyes. You watch them pass. They watch you in turn. This is reciprocity. Do not replace every damaged gondola. A gap in the line is drama, the implication of loss, the anticipation of resumption, relief when the sequence does resume. When the lights go out, consider leaving them that way. Consider running the sequence dark for an interval. A thing that does not perish seems magical with the fact it can perish on display, and there is melancholy in a funeral procession. Melancholy is appurtenant to mist, and all eyes one day dim. We then have an interview between Kells and Pachacootic, the station master of that universe. Kells is walking down a long boardwalk of steel, painted in flaking red. Red filament lights flicker beside him, and the surrounding space is filled with a dense sepia fog. Gondola lifts slide in and out of view on shining silver cables threaded through the casters of impossibly tall pylons. Most of the windows are brilliantly lit, fog lights diffusing in the air, but there are gaps in each line. The gondolas are servicing a series of stations which fan out from a central hub, where a large kiosk of rusted metal with an open window stands. Kells approaches the kiosk, where a dim overhead light illuminates a single-seated figure, who looks up and asks Kells for a token. Kells pats his pockets and says that it must be in his other coat. Pachacootic narrows their eyes at him and then nods, recognizing Kells and saying no token then. Kells wonders what would be the point, as there isn't enough traffic here to turn a profit. Charging just seems performative, to which Pachacootic agrees and says that that's why they're tokens. Kells looks out at the gondolas, then walks to the edge of the boardwalk and looks down. There's nothing but mist and distant lights below, and he takes a deep breath before coughing. Pachacootic asks if he's ever ridden the gondolas before, and Kells says that he hasn't, and he doesn't think he will either. He doesn't think he'd like being cooped up in there while somebody drags him through the fog. Pachacootic shakes their head and says that we're all being dragged through the fog, but at least here you have a lifeline, and you don't need to know where you're going because someone else figured it out for you first. Kells leans on the kiosk sill and looks down to see a copy of the manual. He taps it for emphasis and says that he's looking into this. Pachacootic shrugs and asks if he's starting a book club. Kells replies that they're pretty far out now, so he imagines their copy is full of strange stuff. But Pachacootic replies that everything is strange here, and they live in a haze. Kells can relate, but he was wondering if they have any thoughts on the manual and what it means to them. Pachacootic says that it's nice to know they don't have to fix every part that breaks, because they can't anyway. No amount of money could fix what's breaking around here. They pick up a red token and begin running it between their fingers as Kells watches in fascination. They begin talking about the pylons, saying that nobody knows how far down they go, and maybe that's how they did it. Maybe it's easier to sink a pylon into forever than just 50 miles down. Whatever they're embedded in, though, even if it's nothing at all, they wouldn't be able to tell him how they'd go about doing that themselves. And if they come loose, or when they come loose, they don't know how they'll set them right. Kells asks if there's nothing in the manual about that, and Pachacootic laughs, saying that the manual tells them to just let them fall, so that's what they did. They can still see it though, a whole line going down. Pylons canting into the fog, the angle changing, the lights tracing hazy arcs as the gondolas swing down, down, and then it's all gone. The fog took back the little strip of space they'd stolen, and now they couldn't point out where it used to be if asked. That was 30 years ago, and they're probably just about due for another. Kells repeats that he doesn't think he'll ever ride the gondolas, but Pachacootic just asks why not, causing Kells to sigh. Kells asks where the void comes from, but Pachacootic suggests that that's backwards, as everything comes out of the void. Kells just asks to humor him, so Pachacootic shrugs expansively and says that used to be, a long time ago, you could see the ground from up here, where things grew. Then something else took root in the world next door, something that's built on life to make something less than death, and they were sure they could stop it spreading here. They had to believe they could stop it. So they dug, and the surface retreated until they had their perfect, inviolable sanctuary. They cored out their world until there was nothing left of it, out of fear. Could be there's something still down there, and Pachacootic hears things from time to time. The manual tells them to listen. It doesn't tell them what to do when they hear something, but they think that what it does to their heart is the answer. Maybe he should go looking and see if there's a little perfect acre in the deeps. Maybe there's a little skyscraper on top, blinking out gibberish in Morse. Kells quips that maybe there's a giant fog machine, as he picks up the manual and begins rifling through. Pachacootic says that the point is that this isn't a space anymore, it's an interval. In a way, that's all Lampeter ever was. Kells imagines that there isn't much practical in these pages, but Pachacootic thinks that it's very practical. Kells cites one section titled, "What to Do When the Lights Come for You," and Pachacootic asks if he would feel safer not knowing. Kells asks what it means, and Pachacootic looks out at the fog and the distant paired lights. They say that when you watch them too long, everything shifts. They aren't just passing by anymore, they're coming at you, out of the pale. It can be tempting to let them take you, but that isn't their job. Not yet. Pachacootic has to stay and watch them go. Kells asks how they deal with it, and Pachacootic just says to check the manual, which Kells reads that it says they should go. Pachacootic says that that's what the last station master did, and that's how they got the job. Maybe when it's their time, they'll look up at them, and they'll look down, and they won't be afraid, and they'll go. But not yet. Who would sit here and talk to Kells? Kells says that they're like ghost lights, but there can't be people in all of these gondolas. Can't they just turn off the lights remotely? Pachacootic tells him to check the manual again, which says that the lights must stay on the balance, for as long as someone is coming. When no one is coming, all lights must go off at once. Kells remarks that they don't mean anything. The lights are on, but nobody's home. Eyes with no life behind them, blind and bleeding, and Pachacootic compares them to the neon god, although Kells doesn't respond to this. Pachacootic says that it's still beautiful, the mindless procession, but it did change the tune when the pylons fell. They flip the token into the air and it rings out as it spins. They say the tune is what they call it, the resonance of the cables, into the boardwalk, the walls, and always in the tokens. They wonder if they ring no matter where they are, as long as the cables are running, though Kells doesn't imagine so. Pachacootic says that this whole station is one big stringed instrument, and the tune hasn't rung quite right since that line fell. You can't play the same songs on 5 strings, and they do miss the extra light. The world's just that little bit less bright now, or maybe their eyes are going, or both. Kells walks to the rail again and looks out at the passing gondolas. It's impossible to tell, with the glare from the windows, whether anyone is riding. Kells says that Pachacootic may be right, actually, that it's probably very comforting to see the glare when you're in one of these gondolas. You know you're not the only thing left in the universe when you can see another set of lights blooming out the window. Pachacootic, however, says that the lights aren't to let people know the gondolas are there. It's to let the fog know the people are there. Kells replies that he's starting to think it's not healthy to breathe this stuff in. Pachacootic agrees, saying that it burns when their lungs are raw from yelling into it. Kells asks what they're yelling at, but Pachacootic says that they just yell, trying for an echo if it helps him imagine that there's a purpose. Kells asks if they ever get one, an echo or a purpose, but he's guessing that they'll say no to both. Pachacootic just replies that he's played this game before. Kells sighs, then begins to cough again. He closes his eyes tight, then opens them again, to see that the glare from the gondolas is blinding. He staggers back against the far railing and flinches away from the gondolas, as though he has seen something. He half raises both hands in a defensive position, squinting against the light, and Pachacootic says that now he gets it. Kells stares at them, bleary-eyed, before backing away. He places one hand on the rail, guiding himself to the stairs. He doesn't take his eyes off the gondolas until they are indiscernible in the sea of glowing murk. We're then given another note from Kells, which reads, "When I was very young, my parents and grandparents built a playhouse for me in my backyard. I don't know whether it or the swing set came first. Certainly it antedates the wagon. My childhood seems to have happened all at once, in a single instant, when I look back on it now. A flat, shiny token, all surface and impressions. The shed was blue and white. Like the swings, though I never really thought of that until now. But a different blue. Eggshell, which I suppose is appropriate in retrospect. I helped them build it. That's the story I've always told myself, though I've also always known it wasn't quite true. I had my little plastic orange hammer, just a toy. The face was hollow, and it would have put a hole in it if I drove too many nails. But I put a few finishers in the boards that made up the threshold, anyway. I don't remember if that was their idea or mine. I want to say it's because I recognized the power of that limon, the meaning of it. Crossing from one domain to another. Comings and goings. The margins between seeings and doings. Of course, I wasn't actually that bright, but in my memory it seems like the sun had me covered. My past is never dark. It was just painted plywood. I don't know if it was meant to last, but it's still there, and mostly still blue and white. Eventually, it was nobody's house anymore, unless you counted the mice and squirrels, and we started calling it a shed, and so the play was over. It's rotting and flaking, like all things do when the people who love them move on to other things, and yet I really don't think I could ever bear to see it go. There's a version of me still in there, breathing in the must and dust, kneeling on the wooden slats, whiling time, never wasting, sitting on the stoop and leaving my little maker's mark. There's a knothole in the back wall, big enough for light to come through, big enough that you could put your eye up to it and look inside, or out. I used to do that from both sides, peering through the narrow aperture. It made the familiar seem strange, like something glimpsed in a dream, or through a dark glass. Like that threshold on the other side did really, truly lead to a different world entirely. That's where the wagon lives now. At least I think it does. Sometimes I'm too anxious to check on things like that, to see if the landscape has shifted and the landmarks gone. But no, I'm sure it's still there. The hole is still there too, no wider than before, and my eyes are no larger. I could still look if I wanted to. I'm just afraid that if I did, I might not see myself looking back. We then have an interview between Kells and an unknown Lampeter patron on a subway train in Universe X812, Cross Lines. Kells is searching the train, car to car, as it barrels through the tunnel. The lights within the train are dim, and the metal is rusted in places. There is a man in the final car, on the bank of seats at the very front, before the driver's compartment, clutching a closed book. Kells states that he's looking for the station master, after trying at every station, and the man says that he supposes he's gone. Kells says that he can't just be gone, but the man replies that most people who have ever been are. Kells approaches and asks who he is, to which he just says that he's a traveler, asking who Kells is. Kells states his name, but the man asks who he is, leading to a brief pause. Kells says that he just wants to know what's going on, but the man says that everything is going on. That's the beauty. Kells quips that there's all the multiverse to wander, and everybody talking past him. The man says that it takes less time to say what he means, and they don't have a lot left. But if he's willing to sacrifice it, he can answer his questions instead. Kells asks what he means about not having a lot of time left, and the man asks if that is not his experience. Kells sighs and tells him that he wants to talk about the El-Nesk Operator's Manual, to which the man calls it the Gospel, the last, best testament of the lines. He lifts his book and shows it to be an instance of the manual. Kells asks if he's not the station master, and the man asks in turn if he looks tethered. Kells replies that he sounds unhinged, causing the man to laugh and say that the hinged can go either way, while he has chosen his arc, and it's too late to arrest the momentum. Kells asks what that makes him then, a priest of Lampeter? And the man says that there are no priests, or there are, but it's not what he thinks. Kells asks what the priesthood of Lampeter would be, and the man just wordlessly raises the manual again. He states that this is their interlocutor, as Lampeter is an unwritten song with 4,000 verses, all unique. To ride the line is to commune with all who have ridden before, who ride now, whose rides are yet to come. To speak without words, to hear what nobody is saying. The manual distills the essence of that communion. Kells says that he's talking about a book that usually only operators get to read, but the man replies that they hold no secret liturgy, and the language is universal. This holy text needs no translation, only repetition, and it interprets itself. Kells says that he's lost him, and the man explains that to communicate is to move a thing along, while to translate is to shift it down an axis. Two different ways to describe the same thing, to convey that which transcends language, and there is nothing more transcendent than a thing out of place, or a person. Transportation is always radical, and he tells Kells to spread the word. Kells, however, says that it's a dead gospel, gathering dust on shelves in empty stations, visited by empty trains, read by armchair philosophers who can't give him a single straight answer about what it actually means. There is no choir, and Lampeter is just a network of silences. The man counters that these worlds are not silent, and they will never be silent again. They were silent before Lampeter, but Lampeter is sound. Silence is false, an untruth, the the space between truths, no matter how long the wait. He then says that Kells should get off at this stop, as the train jerks abruptly to a halt and the doors open. The station is poorly lit, and the overhead lights flicker. Kells makes no move to leave, and eventually the doors close again, and the train resumes its journey. He asks the man what he meant about no matter how long the wait, and the man says that creation waits for us. It was waiting before we were, only half a story, a world unbuilt. We complete it. We are its truth. Before humanity, there was no such thing as sound. Nothing else perceives it as we do. Nothing else can make it real. Lampeter is the lungs of the multiverse, and we are its voice. Kells asks if that's how he'd define it, but the man grimaces and says that he doesn't define it, it defines him. Lampeter is Lampeter, for now. The life cycle nears its end, the terminal station. Kells says that it's a transportation network, and not even one single thing. The man asks why they named it then, but Kells says that the people who built it did, and that was another act of arrogance. The man asks Kells if he has children, and if he did, would he name them? Kells replies that he's describing a constellation of wormholes as a child, but the man says that that's what it used to be. It hasn't been a child for a long, long age. It's elderly now, and on the decline. Kells states that infrastructure doesn't work that way, but the man counters that everything we build works exactly that way. Our buildings are born, and we celebrate them with great pomp and ritual. They age, and grow, and adapt. They take on many careers, and their skin falls off and regenerates, and the little microorganisms inside them live short, little lives and replace themselves too. In time, every tower on every shore becomes old, becomes decrepit, and we regard them with a sweet and bitter mixture of resentment, affection, and fear, until finally they are gone. They fall into the fathomless sea, and the cycle is complete. Kells replies that he can make anything a metaphor with the right frame, and the man agrees, explaining that before he was a believer, he was an architect. Some frames just hit right, though, and we spend most of our lives in these shells that we build for ourselves. He asks Kells if he believes he is more than just the matter that comprises him, causing Kells to hesitate. If he does, then surely he understands that you leave some part of yourself everywhere you go. You linger, you imbue, you make these things alive by sharing your life with them. Every Earth has been a patchwork quilt of living urban fabric since we left the caves and thatch. Perhaps even the caves are still in soul. Kells remarks that he doesn't sound significantly less deranged than the prophets of the Neon God, causing the man to comment on the etymology of the word derange, meaning to disorder the lines. That process started the moment the first passenger stepped onto the first Lampeter train. We are the derangement on the lines, and there's no prophecy. That's just the way things are. Always has been, and will be until the end. Kells says that there doesn't have to be an end. Things can be fixed, cables restrung, roadbeds rebuilt. Most of the system isn't even technological, they just use that technology to reach it. The man replies that he's still thinking of Lampeter as the holes it runs through, and Kells exclaims that that's all it is. Just because he drives his car down a side road, hits the right pothole, and ends up on the Skyway in A356 doesn't make the side road and Skyway part of Lampeter. That kind of logic would mean everything is part of everything all the time, to which the man just says, precisely. The flashes of light outside the windows are increasing in frequency, and Kells starts as though he has seen something. The man says that Kells believes, or he once did, and he's been preaching to a fallen congregation of one. Kells counters that he doesn't think of becoming more rational as a fall, but the man says that it is. It wasn't rational to raise a fist to heaven and beat holes clean through the Empyrean, but ascension is always disorderly. Order propagates on the horizontal axis, but you must be aberrant to rise, and falling is the province of philosophers. All that thinking weighs you down. Kells says that down is the trend, and they're mice on a sinking ship, but the man states that this is not a story of defeat. A thing doesn't need to last forever to be mighty. They moved the Earth. They moved Earths, pulled them so close together you can see strange peaks from the top of each world. They have unfolded the universe. That is a work worthy of naming, worthy of song. Their labors and lamentations only add a note of bitter to the sweetness of the tune. Sing in protest of the silence. Disturb it. Kells says that he sounds like a revolutionary, and the man says that transportation always radicalizes. Some people act because they can't stand still. Some make noise because they can't abide stillness. There's a specific sort of individual who can't be left alone with themselves and interiority, so they push out. Perhaps they too transcended, carried home within them, with them, and shared theirs with us. Now it's just ours, and they're gone, but their right to see it survive remains. It was built by the dead, and they still have their stake in it. The man places his hand on the windowsill and slides his fingers along. When he pulls back, there is rust and what might be blood on his palm. Kells reaches out to touch it as well, but stops himself and stuffs his hands in his jacket pockets. Kells says that they have a responsibility for what's happened to it too. It's hard to see all of this as anything more than a beautiful failure, a respectable attempt that fell short of the mark. The man says that there's always an element of chance with investment, always a risk. That multiplies exponentially when your investment crosses the multiversal boundary. The Lampeters knew that they wouldn't be on top forever, but they set that against the fact that they'd see farther than everyone else before they had to come back down. They were fighting to see who could realize the same vision, the Elnesk and the Neon God. Steel from sea to sea to sea, bounding the firmaments. Then the Elnesk stop, and now they reassess. Does Lampeter fit the bill, or will the god overtake it in the end? Or is there an end? Or is reality just a circuit, an endless course with no terminus? Kells wonders if they will march us, one on either side, into the sea, but the man says that we're not so easily led as he thinks. Humanity is a species of trailblazers, and this is why he says they need no priesthood, not of flesh and blood and bone at least. They lay down trails, lay down roads, lay down tracks. You really start to dream when you lay down. In this shared dream, we walk the same paths, guided by the same instincts, wearing the soil into ruts and filling those ruts with asphalt and glass and steel, driven by the dream within a dream of being elsewhere. Kells says that that lasts until there's no more elsewheres, until we've killed them all. The man replies that the multiverse was dead before Lampeter, and these are the arteries of a beating heart now. You can feel it through your boots, humming in the rails across your bones. It beats low, but the blood still moves. Kells says that not for much longer, as there's rust in the veins. And then what? What comes after the life cycle ends? The man shrugs and suggests recycling, causing Kells to huff impatiently. The man apologizes, saying that it's too easy to riddle in the dark. What happens when a made thing ends its life is that it becomes all the more precious. When it no longer matters, it's left to those who truly care. The authors of this gospel, written in their heart's own blood. Every man his own hymnal. Kells asks if he thinks that the manual was authored by the people who ride the line, literally. But the man says that the manual is Lampeter writing love letters back to them. He reads them in voyeuristic rhapsody. Kells quips that he's never read a love letter where the writer just talks about themselves, but the man says that something is always lost in translation. She's telling them how to understand her, and that's the greatest gift a lover can ever give. Love is understanding, and true love is understanding that you are understood. Kells asks what Lampeter is then, if it's alive or sapient or another god. The man states that he thinks Kells already knows, and Kells says that it's connections. The man agrees, calling it an everlasting, all-encircling cable. Connection is everything, and Lampeter is nothing when divided from us, and we are lesser without it. Lampeter is the steel soul of humanity, of all humanities. A screeching sound suddenly rises in pitch and intensity, causing Kells to fall to his knees, clutching his ears. The man states that he should have taken the last stop, as he reaches up to pull the emergency cord. The brakes squeal, and the blur of light outside the window stabilizes into a meaningless, pulsing maze of neon. The man says that this is the end of the line, as the lights on the train switch to emergency red and the doors slide open. Kells staggers to his feet, staring at the man for a moment before running out into the darkness. The details are all smoothed out and indistinct, and the tiles are gleaming, not grungy and cracked as they had been where Kells first boarded the train. The station name on the wall is a jumble of meaningless symbols, almost words, but really just the impression words would give to something that knew how to create the illusion of form, but never the fact of meaning. A thing that wouldn't know what to do with a word, either written down or spoken aloud. A cry so strangled it's mute. There are advertisements on the wall as well. Images that do not hold up to an instant's scrutiny. Architecture where the lines don't meet. Faceless figures with too many fingers. None of it means anything, but one thing. The man comes to the front of the train, and Kells raises a hand in farewell, while the man raises his copy of the manual. Before he is out of sight, the lights go out, and what comes on a moment later isn't really light at all. So Kells ignores it, puts it behind him, shining gray on nothing. We're then given an excerpt from the 1000th and presumed final edition of the manual pertaining to the subway in that universe. Of below. Worm's eye view is a misnomer. Worms are blind. But they can sense light, and they can sense dark, and the press of bodies against their flesh. But they cannot sense the end, and so they will not notice it, and so they will outlast. If we are to survive like worms, persist beyond persistence, we must adopt the worm's perspective. The space beyond the windows should be lit only intermittently. Within the body of the beast, all is light. Without, all is dark. The train is a single organism pushing through black, racing between snatches of white, shrinking from the safety of stasis. Passengers packed together like annelid segmentation, writhing upon each other with every turn. Rush hour is the zenith to universal oneness. Above the crush of stinking automobiles, a carpet of unmoving flesh in synthetic, awaiting fire from the sky to transform them into rivers of exposed and stagnant slag. Below, the worm is free, and will remain so. A subway crawls so that humans may walk. to the final threshold and beyond. We're then given a transcript of a conversation between Kells and an individual fitting the description of Nanami Tani, Station Master in Universe X810, Pan Pacifica. Kells is walking through the subway tunnel, alone, with extremely poor visibility. A silhouette appears in the distance, and he moves towards it. An older woman is walking slowly in the same direction, and she glances back at Kells as he approaches, nodding. Kells says that he knows her, a station master from further down the line. Nanami says that maybe she used to be, when there was a station there. Kells asks if they're safe here, and she says that nowhere is safe, but if he means do they have time to talk, then she likes to think that they always do. Kells says that he's sorry for what she's lost, and she says that they should have seen it coming, and bets that's what they always say. She says that it was foolish to even give the neon god a name, as you can't apply signifiers to a thing that signifies nothing. It's like trying to glue steel. Then again, she guesses that it speaks more of them than it does of that thing. Kells says that we name our experiences, like we name ourselves. Nanami says that it makes sense, since we are our experiences, and very little else. Experience is enough to change the rider, and maybe enough to change the ride. Kells says that that change isn't for the better. Lampeter is turning into a long, long ladder that everyone pulls up behind them. The two walk in silence for several minutes, until Nanami says that at least when floodwaters rise, they carry a reflection. You can see yourself in them if you look down, but the neon god is nothing like that. Kells thinks that it says something about us in negative, what we could be, but aren't. Nanami says that it's the dead end of all ambitions, the great canceling out. All their innovation, webs of steel across every eternity, and the best they can do against it is to turn and run away. Some might call that a sick climax to such a promising story, and nothing but the denouement after. Kells says that escape is just another kind of journey. She says that it ends that way for some, the lucky ones, but it always starts with losing everything, and that's inauspicious. Kells won't trivialize what she's going through, but when he first started the trip that brought him here, he felt like he'd lost everything too. Everything that mattered to him. And that after a long life filled with watching things he cared about wither to nothing. It was kind of freeing, just walking away. Nanami says that it's always freeing, as long as the ride continues, and humanity rides forever. Kells replies that that's a nice idea, if a little difficult to believe at the moment. Nanami says that maybe once he's lost everything a few more times, he'll understand resilience. Kells wishes that Lampeter was more resilient, but Nanami replies that in every way that counts, Lampeter will last. Kells says that his journey started for a reason too, and he'd like to see it through. It's not all he has, but it's not far off. He's out here because of the operations manual. Nanami laughs, calling it metatextual, and admits that she doesn't know much about it. The technical things she needs to know to do her job, a few pages of the other stuff she's snuck a look at over the years, but generally she lets it lie. Kells thought that most of the station masters consulted the manual a lot, especially this far out, but she doesn't think it's for her. The practical bits are, but the rest is for posterity. Kells asks her what she thinks the manual is, and she thinks that it's the record of a voyage, all of theirs, from the start of Lampeter to the end. The first drafts are rough, like outlines, mechanically sound but lacking depth. The later drafts convey, and Kells compares it to Lampeter itself. Nanami calls that a strangely poetic position for a Foundation administrator to take, and he says that he's found himself in plenty of strange positions since he started this trip. Nanami replies that every step of a trip except the first is always strange. Kells says that the operations manual is humanity's memoirs then, but asks who is meant to read it. She thinks that maybe they are, when they reach the end of lines, or maybe it's meant for whoever replaces them when they're gone. Kells suggests that maybe it's meant for the Neon God, and she hadn't considered that. Maybe all their wanderings have been about crafting a glue that will stick to steel. He says that he's asked people what they think the manual is dozens of times now, and he hasn't heard the same answer twice. Nanami, in turn, asks him what he thinks it is, and he calls it an open question, a reason to go out and ask. A thing is what a thing does. What it did was bring him. Nanami asks if that was a good thing, and Kells says yes, he thinks so. The two round a bend into a straightaway, and Kells blinks in sudden light. We're given another note from Kells, which reads, "The tunnel was filled with bodies. They were alive. In spite of everything, they were alive. On the walkways in the tunnel, or huddled against their pilings on the tracks, just inches away from where the train would pass. Scars on skin where it passed too close. Wide, staring eyes and tattered clothing. Thousands of them. We walked for miles. It was black as pitch and silent as death. We found each other one by one, as Nanami and I had done. And we kept on finding until you couldn't say for sure where one body began and the other ended. A horde, a caravan, a huddled mass in search of sheltering shores. It felt like something was forcing the air out of the tunnel, an oppressive absence of anything pursuing us up the line, eager for its next meal. No, not eager. No anticipation. Grinding concrete tombstone teeth. Mindless mastication. So, I sang a song. Some of them had heard it before, and sang with me. Some hadn't, but they picked up the chorus and joined in when it came round again. A song about a voyage from day to night. About how some things end, but no thing is ever forgotten, not so long as you can sing about it. A song about a train. After a while, I lagged behind. The danger was long past, driven back for the present moment by the strength of our connection, by a medium in which it could not propagate, communication it could never translate, and so it sat upon its axis, lurking at the periphery where distance rendered it almost a passable facsimile of the things that frame life, if not life itself. Livid, but inert. And when I was truly alone again in the darkness, I saw a single red bulb spark in the middle of a concrete wall, cracks forming around it, metal winding into plastic, winding into pale, twinkling wires. The predator kindling its fairy light. The lure set. I watched the wires wink on and off, and squinted at them in the gloom. Fiber optics, I thought. That was interesting. Perhaps the slabs obstructing the tunnel were asbestos, and the windows double glazed. Might they one day be webbed lattice, like I saw on Nur's space elevator? It was a pretty thought. And as the wires branched out further, and the dappled false light raced out ahead of them, I saw these words upon the wall. It lives. And I knew it didn't matter who had written them, which madness they reflected. Because I knew that either they were right today, or they might well be tomorrow. So I turned away again, and I kept on walking. Upon returning to the terminal station in Universe X-812, Kells sees that the refugees are filing into the dimly lit station, filthy with age and neglect. There are carts set up on the rails, carrying people to the siding where the Lampeter connection to Universe X-820 is located. Cots and sleeping bags are set up everywhere, and there are stacks of supplies in every corner. Kells hauls himself onto the platform and lies on the floor for a moment to catch his breath. He hears a woman call out his name from above him, and he opens his eyes to see Dr. Rosie Hartlepool with a look of concern on her face. He laughs and says that of course it's her. She helps him to a sitting position and asks what was he doing on the line, to which he just says that he was starting a book club. She looks him over, noting that he doesn't seem injured, and he takes her hand, saying that she made it back. He asks her what she saw at the far end, and she considers it for a moment before saying that it's not important. She asks him what he saw on his trip, and he says that he saw lots of things, but he thinks the value was in what he heard. Hartlepool shakes her head and says that she's very surprised to find him out here, and Kells says that he was surprised to find him too. She remarks that she saw his last few updates to the 7005 file, and nothing they do counts for anything. Kells replies that it doesn't count to the Council, but they don't count either. Kells slowly rises to his feet and looks around, seeing that the refugees he entered the station with have not been further supplemented, and the relief efforts appear to be winding down. In the light, it can be seen that many are openly weeping, or have been for some time. Some are carrying luggage or loose possessions. Others are carrying their compatriots. Conversation is hushed, but snatches of song can still be heard. The refugees are to each other, one at a time. Kells asks if there's anything they can do to help, but Hartlepool says they're just about done here, with Kells being the last bunch. She asks if Kells was following her, but Kells suggests that maybe the line brought them together. Hartlepool considers him carefully, and he says that he was looking into the manual. He thinks he brought them from no explanation to a dozen that only go halfway, but he doesn't think it's worth asking whether any of them are true. What they all have in common, what really matters, is that in some sense they all tell him that Lampeter is alive. She asks in what sense, and he just spreads his hands wide, telling her to take her pick. She considers him again, before saying that it's no crazier than anything else. It makes it even more sad, though, that Lampeter is dying. Kells counters that everything dies, but she says that that doesn't mean it has to die badly. There's still a chance for this thing to achieve something, be something more, and they're squandering it. Once it's gone, the story is over. Kells doesn't believe that, though. Not anymore. Death isn't when something stops meaning anything. It's when you can finally see the scale of how much it meant. The two hear laughter and turn to see Nanami hugging one of the refugees, both in tears. Kells says that he thinks it's all going to be okay, even if it isn't. Because when you get right down to it, he thinks that their story and Lampeter's both point to the same conclusion, that matter matters. Hartlepool shakes her head in disbelief and says that she thinks he's been huffing fumes, which Kells doesn't disagree with. He imagines that the manual is going to start publishing its final editions soon. He'd love to see what it looks like in some of the worlds the Neon God has taken over. Hartlepool assumes it will just be blank pages, but Kells isn't so sure, saying that he wouldn't be surprised if it's the only thing that hasn't been changed. Hartlepool remarks that he's getting awfully mystical about this book, to which he says that the book gets awfully mystical about him. She sighs and says that she feels like she should stop trying, but she knows she's not going to. Kells says that he sees she's already been busy doing good while he was crawling out of his bottle, and she replies that one of them had to. Kells notes that it might be easier with two, and she considers him for a moment before placing a hand on his shoulder and nodding. The overhead lights flicker, causing the assembled mass to look up as one, with concern on their faces, while Hartlepool smiles. She says that she guesses she's still wondering whether or not it's going to make a difference, even if they bring their best. Kells doesn't think so, as you get difference from subtraction. If they bring their best, if everyone does, that's the sum of all humanity, all humanities. It can't help but be better than that empty quantity, the zero beneath the dividing line. She says sure, but if she knows anything for certain now, it's that the whole damn system is bound for a fall. It's an unavoidable fact of the road they're on. Kells says that the bridge is out, and the train keeps going, but as she said, the words will stand. He asks if the lines home are still running, and she asks if he's eager to get back. He says not quite, but he'll run on ahead if that's alright with her. She asks where he's off to in such a hurry after escaping the gray apocalypse, and he says that he's off to kiss a woman on a train. Because if he never passes this way again, if the lines end, or they end, or everything everywhere ends, even if there isn't much as a single scrap of evidence left to prove it, he'll at least know a part of himself is still out there, still hanging in the air. Lastly, we get one final report from Kells, which reads, "Life's most wonderful characteristic is its capacity to love other life. But its strangest, by far, is its capacity to love the inanimate. Our drive to see ourselves reflected in the things we build, to see others in the things they build, to see our forebears in the rust, and the promise of our children in the shine of new laid steel. That isn't something we are born with. That's something we, all of us together, have created. Set aside a place for it in our hearts, and there is room for expansion still. I remember the pattern on the swing set now. It was a chain. That which binds, that which connects. Across the span of years, that chain connects me to someone I thought lost forever. The boy who saw it first in summer sunlight on a day that seemed eternal, now long dead. The memory was waiting for me out there on the line, a snapshot of my missing link that I could hold and bring back with me. What other connections might we find? What links might we forge, if only we muster the will to get up and go? Perhaps someday even the neon god will be looked upon not with fear, mania, or resignation, but the warm and sentimental glow of long association. Perhaps that will change it, make it ours, give it meaning. If Lampeter can die, perhaps the neon god can live. Perhaps that is our collective way out of this long decline into desperate anomie. Fear cannot forever withstand familiarity, nor can love resist it. Probably not, but it never hurts to dream. Lampeter, after all, is a dream made manifest. I think of Nur's shining elevator, and Andronova's tiresome treadmills, and I think I understand now why nothing in any universe dies unmourned. Though iconoclasm is a blade, time blunts every cutting edge. And love? Love can turn them, as it turns the ever-spinning wheels that drive us forward in our multitude of worlds. At the moment I left the council chamber at Site-01, I knew why I'd lived the life I had. Seen the things I'd seen, lost the things I'd lost. I knew what I'd been prepared for. I was going to be the one to witness the end of everything. The overseer I spoke to confirmed that the multiverse was doomed, that Lampeter would die. Not that nothing could or should be done, but certainly that nothing would. The neon god was real and destined to win. Humanity was an elaborate joke. I was a crude one. A limerick about a slip and a fall and a crack of bone on ice. In one conversation, he took everything from me. And the very next day, I realized I've been waiting my whole life to lose it. There is beauty in rust. There is meaning in failure. But most of all, there is the simplest and uttermost fact of life in every single universe. Stasis is nothing. Transition is everything. There is always another way. There is always a way out. Turn your head 90 degrees from what you perceive as loss, and in its third dimension you will see it for what it truly is. Change. And as anyone who has ever ridden the rails can tell you, enough change can get you anywhere. So, we ride on. So, there isn't really an explosive climax here, or a grand, elaborate explanation. We still don't really know where the manuals are coming from, or what's going on with the Neon God. Instead, the journey was about the journey. Kells began his journey here with a very clear goal in mind, and even though he failed to complete that goal, there is meaning in failure. He changed as a result, and enough change can get you anywhere. I cover a lot of different types of SCPs on this channel, but it's rare to get one that's quite so poetic. That's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, just like any piece of art, but in a universe of endless anomalies, there's going to be endless types of experiences. Lampeter will, of course, fall, and the Neon God will almost certainly continue to spread and change the multiverse, but existence is in a perpetual state of change regardless. The least we can do is enjoy the journey.